Welcome everyone to the 10-Minute University Noontime Chat. For those of you who are not familiar, 10-Minute University is a trademark for short classes, videos, and handouts on essential gardening information for the home gardener. Oregon State University owns the trademark, and the Clackamas County Master Gardeners developed the program. Today is part of our 2021 series. You can find this recording and other recordings at the 10-Minute University resources at cmastergardener.org. So now we will begin our presentation. Okay, here is a list of some of the 10-Minute University handouts that are also available at cmastergardeners.org. The ones listed here can help you with information concerning this talk today. Now, Oregon State University Extension also has many publications available. The two that I have listed here will give you some information that you can use when learning about early gardening, early vegetable gardening. Okay, this is a list of what I hope you learn from this talk today. I'm hoping that you will know which vegetables are best suited for early spring sowing. You'll know the benefits of why we're planting these early vegetables. You'll understand how to determine if the soil is ready for planting. And you'll gain an understanding of how to choose between the seeds and the transplants. You'll also become familiar with season extenders that helps warm the soil and protect the plants. All right, the benefits. Why grow early season vegetables? Well, cool season crops do well in cool weather. That just kind of makes sense, doesn't it? They germinate and grow when the soil and the air temperature is cooler. There are less pest problems. Many of the pest insects that we have in our vegetable gardens don't appear in the garden until after the temperature is warmer. There's also less watering. You know, with our usual spring rains, you'll be using less irrigation. Also, you can increase the production of your vegetable garden by using succession plantings. In other words, you could plant a few plants, another week later you can plant a few more. Also, if your early crops, your spring crops, your cool crops are finished, you can use that same space for putting in your warm season crops. Also, there are some vegetables that bolt during warm weather. Bolting is what happens when a vegetable goes to seed. When the weather warms up, many of the cool season crops will bolt. If you've ever seen lettuce or broccoli grow really tall and thin, that's bolting. Okay, now you want to know, what can I grow? For our early crops, you can grow items in the broccoli family. That would include broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts. You can grow leafy greens like Swiss chard, lettuce, dill, beet greens, bok choy, green onions, kale, spinach, just to name a few. Your root vegetables like carrots, beets, kohlrabies, and radish, these are all cool season crops. These are our early growing vegetables. And you can also grow asparagus, peas, onions, and potatoes. Now, the cool season crops, which include these, asparagus is the only one that I have talked about that is a perennial crop. It can be planted in early spring, but you aren't going to, it will take a couple seasons before they start to produce. Now you know what you want to plant. Now you're going to figure out, well, when can I plant? So there are a lot of planting charts like this one. This one is available in that Grow Your Own publication that I talked about. Also, if you go to cmastergardeners.org, we have more planting charts. None of them are exactly alike. Some of them have a little bit different time changes. Now, this is one way to figure out when you can plant. It will give you a little bit of an approximate time to plant, but there are two other ways to tell if it is time to plant your early crops. And one of these is the soil condition. If you work the soil when it's too wet, it disturbs the soil structure. It compacts the soil, it reduces the air space and makes it hard for the plant roots and the shoots to grow. So if you want to know whether your soil is ready for planting, you can do the squeeze test. And what you do is you take a handful of soil and squeeze it in your hand, like the picture on the left. If you open it up and that stays a hard ball, you will know that your soil is not ready for planting. Do not disturb it yet. If you open your hand up, like the photo on the right, and you look at it and you push it with your finger and it comes apart, then you'll know that your soil is ready to plant. So if your soil condition is okay, you also need to be sure that the soil temperature is high enough for the seeds to germinate and for the roots to grow. So you need to check your soil temperature in the morning about 7 days in a row, and then average the readings, and then you'll know whether it's warm enough. And you can find soil thermometers like the one in this picture. You can find them at most nurseries or farm stores or other places that sell garden equipment. Okay, now that I told you that you need to check the soil temperature, I'm sure you're wondering, well, what temperatures do they need to be? So here is a list of soil temperatures for the various crops. Now, the ones at the top are our cool season crops, and the ones listed at the bottom are some warm season crops. You notice the difference between the two. You'll find a lot of charts like this in different publications. And like I mentioned with the other chart also, they vary. The temperature degrees will vary a little bit between chart to chart. But if you look at the cool season crops list, you'll see that if the soil temperature is between 45 and 50, you'll probably be safe to begin putting in most of your cool season crops. Now, I've given you a lot of information and places to look, but seed packets also have a lot of good information. Most of them will tell you the soil temperature for germination and a lot of other information about them. This is a really good resource for you to use. But another good resource is seed catalogs. Even if you're not going to buy the seeds from seed catalog, they're really nice to have because they have so much detailed information in them about that specific crop. Okay, you're getting ready to plant, but now you have to figure out what you're going to plant. Are you going to plant seeds or are you going to put in the plants? Some of the vegetable seeds can be sown directly into the garden, but others have to be put in as plants, and we call those transplants. Some of the vegetables will take too long to germinate and produce during our short seasons. So they have to either be purchased. You either have to purchase the plant from a store, or if you have a greenhouse or a cold frame or a nice sunny window, you could start your own seeds. You just have to make sure that you start them enough ahead of time that they can go into the garden at the specific time that you're ready for them. So the ones that you can plant out at seeds are your root vegetables and your leafy greens and your peas. Those can go into the garden as seeds. Anything in the broccoli family, those are going to have to go in as a plant. Like I said, you can either purchase it or you can start your own at home. Then you're also going to be putting in other, not seeds or plants, which potatoes, you're going to be buying disease-free certified seed potatoes. And those are the tubers, and that's what you're going to be putting in the ground. The onions, you're going to be putting in what we call them onion sets. The little bulbed onions are called onion sets. So you will either purchase those, or if you're going to plant a sweet onion, like a Walla Walla onion, those will already be grown. And the asparagus will be put in as a root into the ground. Now, sometimes it may help to give your seeds a little head start by either soaking them or pre-sprouting them. It works good to soak the large seeds like peas and beets and radishes overnight before planting them. You see the photo of the peas? You can see how much those peas have enlarged just by being soaked overnight. That will really give them a head start. And if you think maybe your smaller seeds like your root vegetables or the broccoli family need to be sprouted, you need to pre-sprout them, or if your seeds are older and you're not sure whether they're still viable, you might want to pre-sprout those seeds. And what you do to pre-sprout them is you wet a paper towel, put a few seeds inside, and then put it in a warm place. Actually, on top of the refrigerator is a pretty good place to put them. And then keep checking them every few days. And after they do sprout a little bit, you'll know they're viable and you can put them in the garden. But don't let the sprouts get very long. If they're too long, you're going to break them off when you put them in the ground. So make sure they just barely sprout before you put them into the ground. Oh, excuse me, soil pH. Sorry about that. Vegetables prefer a more neutral pH. So it's a good idea to check your soil pH before you plant in the garden. Our native soils in our area are usually a little bit lower. An ideal, the chart shows, this chart, excuse me, I should back up a little bit here. This chart that you see shows some ideal, those are ideal temperatures, ideal pH for all the different vegetables there. But if you actually look at that chart, you'll notice that most of them are somewhere between 6 and 7, which is more neutral. So if your soil pH is between 6 and 7, you know that you're going to have a pretty good chance of your vegetables growing well in that soil. If your soil pH is too low, which like I mentioned, some of our native soils seem to be a little lower than that, you can add lime to the soil. Agricultural lime contains calcium, and dolomite lime contains calcium and magnesium. Now, it usually takes several months for the lime to change the pH of the soil, so it's best to add the lime in the fall. Now, depending on your soil type and the pH of your soil before you add the lime, the recommendation is usually adding between 5 and 10 pounds of lime per 100 square feet. Adding organic matter. It's a really good idea to add 2 to 4 inches of organic matter into your vegetable garden area. This will improve the ability of the sandy soils to hold the nutrients and water. It also will improve the drainage and the aeration in the clay soils. Also, a nice thing that it does, it helps the soil dry out and warm up more quickly in the spring so that you'll be able to get those cool season crops in the ground sooner. But as with checking the pH and adding lime, it is also preferable that you add the organic matter in the fall. If you don't and you need to add that organic matter into your soil before you plant in the spring, then that is still doable. There are many types of organic materials that you can add to your soil. You can add compost, shredded tree bark, peat moss. If you're going to add peat moss, be careful because it's very expensive and you're only going to want to use it if you're using it in a small area, small raised bed area. You can put in aged manure, leaf mold, wood ash. You can add a little bit of wood ash to your garden, but once again, you only want to add a small amount. And if you do have a lot of wood ash, it's better to add that to the compost pile instead of straight into the garden. Now, if you're fertilizing, when you fertilize your plants, the plants take up nutrients from the soil, and the organic matter that you've added to the soil is also going to help those good insects and bugs and the different fungi and things, the good ones that are in the soil. But when the nutrients are missing, then it's time to fertilize. So you need to learn the specific vegetables' needs. Some vegetables are heavy feeders, such as lettuce, and some are light feeders, such as radishes and potatoes. Now, there are several publications that talk about fertilizing. This is just one of them we have from Oregon State University. It's called Fertilizing Your Garden. But after you figure out which vegetables you want to put into the garden, then you can look up some information to find out how much nutrients they need. The other key will be, what are your plants going to look like? You've put a plant, maybe say you've put a plant of cabbage in the ground, or you've put some seeds and they've already sprouted and they don't look as healthy. That's a good indication that you know they're going to need a little bit of fertilizer. Now, because we're planting these in early spring, we never really know what our weather's going to do. So sometimes you might need a little bit of extra help with what we call season extenders, and I will go through these one by one. Row cover is also called floating row cover, and it gets its name because what you can do with this material, you can lay it either just float it on top of your plant, or you can make a frame or a hoop and put it over your plants. What row covers do is they warm the soil that's underneath of the material. Not only that, they also warm the air, sometimes between 5 and 8 degrees warmer underneath a row cover than it is without a row cover. This is a lightweight material, kind of similar to sewing interfacing. And what it does, it also allows the water to penetrate through it. So you can have this over your plants and you can still water them, or the rain can go through. What it also does is keeps out flying insects. If you've ever grown carrots and had problems with the carrot rust fly, using a row cover really will help with that. It will keep the flies out until the carrots get to a point where the flies are not going to be laying their eggs on the new seedlings. Cold frames can be used 2 different ways. They can be used right on top of your garden area, right around the plants, or they can be used to start your plant. So if you are using a cold frame in your garden, it's not going to have a bottom on it, obviously. But if you are using it to start your plants, it may have a bottom, or maybe you may set it on something, as this picture shows, it's sitting on a piece of concrete. What the cold frames are is they're usually built from wood or metal. They have wood or metal sides, and then they're covered with some type of clear covering, either plastic or plexiglass or glass. A lot of people do use them as kind of a mini greenhouse where they start their plants. Another season extender is called a cloche. Cloches are made for individual plants. They are small, low, and they have a transparent cover. They will protect these little tender plants from the cold. These are also good to be using later, even on some of your warm season crops. They're either made out of glass or plexiglass or plastic. You can either buy them from the store or you can make your own. If you notice the picture in the middle of this slide, you will see several milk cartons. Those are covering up some newly planted plants to keep them nice and safe and warm for the cold weather temperatures. Raised beds are a really good idea if you are planting early season crops, because this is what raised beds do. They warm the soil up a lot faster than our soil that's in the ground. It will allow you to get your crops in sooner. It also allows them to grow faster because the soil's warmer, and then because they grow faster, they will yield more. There are a lot of different types of materials you can use as your frames: wood, concrete, lots of different things. Or you don't even have to use a frame. You can actually make a raised bed by just raising up the ground around it. Now, I know I've gone through this presentation kind of quick, but my co-host, Priscilla Robinson, has been checking out your Q&A. So if you would like to put in another Q&A, Priscilla will ask me some of those questions and I will do the best I can to answer them. Okay, Priscilla, hi.
Hi, Jane, that was really great. I'm getting ready to get my cool plants into the garden.
Great, me too.
There are a couple good questions have come in, and one of them is from Abby, and she's wondering why she's not getting good harvests from her onions and her carrots. Do you have any hints to maybe maximize those?
You know, a lot of people seem to have problems with onions. I'm not sure what kind of onion she is growing, but if she's growing the regular ones from the little bulbs, like keeper onions, which she'll buy the set, she'll buy the little bulbs. One of the tricks about growing onions is not to plant them really deep into the ground. So that might be a little bit of the problem which she has with her onions. And it's funny, those two things she talked about. Carrots is another thing that I hear a lot of people say that they have a little trouble growing. One of the things that might help when you plant your very small seeds like your carrots is put the carrots in the ground, and then instead of covering them with your native soil or the soil that you're growing on, get some lightweight potting soil and cover the top of your carrot seeds with the lightweight potting soil. That will encourage them to come through. They won't, the ground won't get that hard crust on it like it sometimes does, and they'll come up through the ground a lot sooner. Have her try that and see if it works.
Okay, Laura, my cousin, who's joining us from Humboldt County, wants to know, what are some of your favorite catalogs, seed catalogs?
Well, the ones that are in our area are really good. Territorial is a one that's from down by near Corvallis. Think of the area, Central Point area down there. They're a really good catalog. Johnny's Selected Seeds has a good selection. They are from back east, but they do have a lot of their seeds will work really well in our area. And one thing about those two catalogs is they have a lot of really good gardening information in them. So there are a lot of them out there. I just get as many catalogs as you can and look through them and see what they say.
All right. How about pests? Someone has problems with peas being eaten by the scrub jay before they can germinate.
Yeah, that's when your row cover would be a good thing to do. Cover them with the row cover so that the birds and other flying insects can't get into them. They'll just need to be covered until they're a little bit bigger.
All right, great. And another person, Carolyn, has a question about coffee grounds. She's heard that they're good for the soil. And sort of going on to that, also, what about amendments like different types of leaves? Someone said they have white oak leaves. So do you recommend those things going into the ground?
Leaf mulch works fine. I would be careful with your oaks. It doesn't seem to break down as quickly. Walnut is not a good leaf mulch to put in there because the tannins that are in the walnuts.
Yeah.
But other leaves, if you chop them up very small before you add them as the amendment, that will work very good. What was the first question you asked?
About the coffee grounds.
Oh, coffee grounds. Yeah. One thing about coffee grounds is they would be fine in your garden. Some people don't think they should put them in their garden because they think that coffee grounds have a very low pH, that they're more acidic, but actually they have found that coffee grounds are not. They have a pH of almost 6. So putting some coffee grounds in, not a whole lot, but putting them in would be okay as an amendment also.
And along that line of amendments, how about manure? I put Julia said she put manure in the fall, and she's worried that the nitrogen may have leached out during the winter rains. What are your thoughts on that?
Nitrogen does leach out during winter rains, but usually if that happens too much and your plants are needing nitrogen, then you may just have to add a little bit of more nitrogen fertilizer. But remember, if you do use manures, that they are aged manures. So if it is aged long enough, it would be safe to use it in the spring instead of in the fall, if that's how she wants to do it, as long as it's aged.
Yeah, and people are really taking care of their soil. Here's someone, Barbara, planted crimson clover as a cover crop. Now she wants to know what to do with it.
Okay. Cover crops work really good for vegetable gardens. The hard part about cover crops is that they are still so green and growing early in the spring that it's hard to get them turned over into the soil. But what she needs to do is cut it down, let it sit a little while to dry out, and then she can work it into the soil.
All right.
That is only if the soil is ready to be worked. So she'll need to take the squeeze test first.
Right. So you were talking about soil temperatures. Is that just for planting the seeds, or would that also apply to transplants?
It also applies to transplant. If the soil is too cold, the roots will not grow. They need that certain temperature. So yes, it also applies to the transplants.
Good one. And people are really interested in the soaking seeds. When you are planting pea seeds, is it necessary to use inoculant?
It's better to buy a pea seed that is already, usually they say the P. initia virus, I believe, Priscilla, that's what it's called. to buy pea seeds that already have some of those inoculants in it. They won't have to add anything to them, but buy some that that shows. And when you look in those seed catalogs, it'll tell you what they have inoculated them for, or what it, you know, it's, I can't think of the numbers right now. I am sorry, like a V and an F and a this and a this. So go through the seed catalogs and read what it tells you. That way you'll know whether the seeds will be healthy enough when you put them in the ground. I hope that's a good enough answer.
I think that's great. And I also love, just that soaking in, actually seeing the emergence of that little embryo. Then you'll know that you're going to get some growth pretty quick.
Yeah.
All right, on the area of pests, Laura wants to know, what are your tricks for getting rid of slugs?
Need to listen to the slug talk that's coming up pretty soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, slugs, you're going to have to, there's a lot of different types of baits that you can use. Preferably, if you're going to be using it around your vegetable plants, you're going to want to use the iron phosphate, which is okay for humans and animals and pets and birds and things like that. You're not going to want to use the methaldehyde because that is very, very dangerous. Beer traps you can use. There's a lot of information out there on different ways to use slugs, to get rid of slugs. That's kind of a hard one because they love being underneath your plants. Just check them constantly. Check them constantly. And one other thing they might know, and the slugs, you'll find a lot of slugs' eggs when you're starting to work your soil. So if you see any of those little round slug eggs, definitely get them out and destroy them so they don't turn into the little babies.
All righty. And there was a question from Andrew Robinson, my son, who wants to know about Osmocote. And when you're working with root vegetables, where should you be applying that Osmocote?
Okay, Osmocote is a synthetic slow release fertilizer. So what you're going to want to side dress. In other words, you're going to want to put, you got your little plant in the middle and you're going to want to put it on the side of the plant. And remember, it is a slow release, so it's not going to work quickly. If you need a fertilizer to work quickly, you're going to want to use a water soluble fertilizer.
All right. Holly has a question about her new garden boxes. What do you think about putting wood, old straw, and goat poop down in the bottom before placing the garden soil on top?
I don't think there would be anything wrong with that. I don't know whether that would help the soil any. It's going to break down, but it's still going to stay at the bottom. If you want an amendment, you want it where the roots are going to be growing, but it wouldn't hurt, especially if she has some she wants to get rid of.
All righty. And this is about raised beds. Do you recommend tilling raised beds? And just sort of to piggyback that, Tina has a question about, she put straw over her soil during the winter. Should that be tilled into the soil or just be removed?
It depends. Sometimes straw has a lot of weed seeds in it, so she might want to remove it, and it won't break down very easy, if you till it in or put it in with a fork, it won't mix in quite as quickly as you might want it to if you're doing it right at that same time. It is a good idea to cover up in the winter time, to cover up the top of the soil and your raised beds.
All right. Sorry, I was just typing in an answer there. There was someone actually asking about soil, and because we're a series of lectures and webinars, there's a lot of great information that was presented by Sherry, one of our master gardeners, on soil. So just refer back to some of those previous webinars, because we really want to be talking about cool plants here. All right. So let's see. Should I start my pumpkin seeds in a greenhouse or should I put it in the ground?
Either way. What I do is I start a few of them in the greenhouse. Sometimes if the weather's not quite right when I plant them out, the transplants don't take very well. So I usually do both. I plant a few in the greenhouse, put them out as plants, and then put a couple more around them as seeds. And usually I find out they seem to produce around the same time because the soil will be warm at that time and the seed will germinate quickly. So it's up to her how she wants to do it.
All right. Let's see. How deep does a raised bed have to be for growing the root vegetables like carrots and onions?
Usually they don't have to be that deep. Some people say 10, but if you figure 16 to 18 inches is probably a good depth to keep them at.
Okay, great. What materials would you suggest for building raised beds that aren't ridiculously expensive? So Brenda, I want you to tune in. That is a webinar that will be coming up next week, I think Wednesday. So
Perfect.
Yep, so I'm not going to answer that now. I'll hope that you'll tune in or at least watch the rebroadcast of that webinar. How should I stop powdery mildew?
Powdery mildew will usually be on your later in the season. So if you're talking cool season vegetables, you probably won't have too much trouble with the powdery mildew. It usually happens later in the season. That's just something that you're going to have to really watch for. That's about all I can say about that, I guess, right now.
Right. Yeah. Here's a question from Tony. When planting seeds, do you have to start them in seedling mix or seedling mix soil? And when do you need to have the fertilizer applied?
Okay, is this person talking about starting them in the greenhouse? Is that what they're saying? Or are they talking about putting them in the ground? If you're putting them in the ground, you don't need to use seed starting mix. If you are starting your own seeds, like in your greenhouse or in your house, then a seed starting mix would definitely give them a little bit of a boost.
Well, I think you've answered both those questions either way. So good job. Do you have experience with hotbeds for spring plantings?
No.
Okay, that was a stumper. Yeah, that might be something that we want to look into. Maybe
yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to look it up.
Yep. Okay. Lots of questions about composting and using some items that you've got from home. How about tea bags and compost?
Tea bags and compost is fine. Just make sure you don't leave the little paper piece and that little metal piece you see on a tea bag. The outside of the tea bag will disintegrate eventually, but if you want to just rip it open and take the tea out, that's fine too. There's a lot of materials you can put in compost, and Oregon State University and our seamastergardeners.org have lots of publications all about the composting too.
All right. Teresa is interested in growing asparagus. Would it be okay to plant it near her blueberry bushes?
The asparagus is going to need a higher pH than your blueberries are. Your blueberries are going to need a very low pH. So you need to make sure that they are far enough away that it isn't going to affect either one of them.
All right. And someone wants to know, what about starting seeds in eggshells? Have you ever done that? And
I have never done that, but I have seen it done. Some people do. It might be kind of a fun thing to try, especially if you have children. And it's a good way to use the eggshells. Get rid of them.
All righty. Let's see. Janet says, I bought Okra Start a few years back. I loved it. Can't find seeds locally or plants. What are your suggestions?
I don't believe okra grows very well in our area. It's mostly a southern state crop. I have never talked to anyone in our area who has grown it. There may be some, but I am not aware of it.
All right. And Kelly wants to know, when should she plant her potatoes?
Your potatoes are your early season crop. So if the temperature in your soil is okay and the soil texture, you do that squeeze test and your soil's okay and the temperature's okay, you can plant your potatoes.
Oh,
It'll probably, in our area, depending on if you have a raised bed, I'm sorry, if you have a raised bed, you'll probably get them in the garden a lot sooner than I will. I don't use raised beds. I plant on my flat ground. So my potatoes probably, depending on the spring weather, it's a lot of different. I have gotten them in as early as the end of April, and I have had to wait until the first part of May, depending on the year. So a lot of it has to do with your soil, the temperature, how dry it is, and what our spring is like.
all right. And there was a question about bolting, which, comes on as the weather warms up. How do people still keep those cool weather crops growing in their garden if some of them are bolting?
If your lettuce bolts, or you cut that part off and see if more leaves, will come up. But your cool season crops are for the cool weather. And that's why we plant them early. We try to harvest them early. I will tell you that your cool season crops, your early season crops, are also your fall season crops. So they can be planted in middle to late summer to be harvested in the fall when our temperatures cool down again, and that will decrease their bolting. But having them during the warm weather, if it's a cool season crop and it's really warm, you will have that bolting problem.
Okay. Do you recommend pre-soaking radish and beet seeds as well before planting?
They're pretty good size, so it's not going to hurt them at all. Yes. It's not that it's necessary, but it does give them a little extra boost.
All right. And let's just say someone doesn't have the ideal 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. What types of vegetables would you recommend growing in the shade or part shade?
Your leafy greens do pretty good with not quite as much sunshine. So your lettuce, your kale, your spinach, things like that do pretty good. Some of your root vegetables might not do too bad, especially since, remember, our early spring crops, our cool season crops, our summer, our sun isn't going to be as bright or as intense anyway, so they might not need quite as much. But of course, you know that your warm season crops, your tomatoes and your corn and your peppers are going to need a lot of sun.
All right. We're getting some really good questions here. They keep coming in. Let's see. I was looking to planting beans in the fall. I usually grow green beans. Will green beans work for a fall crop?
Not regular green beans, no. Fava beans can be planted in the fall. And I believe there may be a few other types, but regular green beans, no. That's definitely a warm season crop.
What if the soil temperature is ready, but my soil is still clumpy when you do the squeeze test? Will mixing organic compost help, or should I just wait?
Well, mixing it in when it's too wet isn't going to help. So it should have either been mixed in the fall, or you're going to have to wait until it dries out more and then mix them in some more. But yeah, if the soil is warm and it isn't ready, you probably don't have enough organic matter in the soil.
Okay. And are there vegetables that could be planted near or under Roadie bushes?
That's a problem too, because rhododendrons like acidic soil. They like a low pH. The vegetables like a high pH. So I would suggest you put something else under there, like primroses. They're pretty.
Yeah. And, the whole idea behind pH is that the plant can't absorb those nutrients when the pH is not correct. That's
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. So it's just going to be a disappointment.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Do you know how to keep carpenter bees out of my greenhouse? They have drilled holes and tunneled to lay eggs for the last 2 years, and I don't want to kill them, but just want to keep them out of the greenhouse.
I don't know how you would, but I do know that carpenter bees have a shorter span to time that they do what they do. So you might just have to live with them.
And those solitary those solitary bees, once they find a habitat that they like, they will return and continue to enjoy.
Yeah.
You must have a nice greenhouse.
Yeah, if she could figure out where in the greenhouse they're doing what they're doing, maybe she could cover that area up or put something else there to stop them from the next year. Put some houses outside.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Might be an idea.
Yeah, so creating habitat that maybe is a little more appealing somewhere else in your yard. So pH is a popular topic. Do you know where to get pH testing, or can you do it at home?
You can do it at home. And unfortunately, because right now we are in COVID and we are not allowed to be in offices, the master gardeners normally do pH testing 3 times a year. The Clackamas County master gardeners and other master gardeners around the state do it also. But unfortunately, we're not able to right now. So your best bet is either to get a home kit to do your soil pH test, or you could send it into an analytical laboratories. It does cost money, but you could send it into them, and Oregon State has a list of analytical laboratories for soil testing if you would like to do that. But the regular little soil tests that you buy in the store will work and give you a pretty fair reading. You'll be about where you need to be.
All right. Let's see. There's still questions. Okay, I'm not sure if this is an early a crop question, but any recommendations against aphids? I'm planning on sowing some marigold seeds, and what else would you recommend to help keep the aphids away?
Aphids like nice new succulent growth. So one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to overdo the nitrogen, because you don't want the new growth to be so succulent that it brings the aphids in. Planting other things that are beneficial crops, the ones that bring in the beneficial insects, is a good way to do it. The beneficials will help take care of those aphids. If you have a crop that is pretty strong, like I know she talked about the little marigold plants, but say you were growing broccoli and they had a lot of aphids on it. If your broccoli was strong enough, just take a hose and with a nozzle on it and just try to hose off as many as you can. That's usually what we do. I would not recommend using some type of chemical, because these are plants that we are going to be eating.
Right. And Louise had a suggestion. She said that Territorial evidently has some sort of okra that is good for a short growing season. And, so.
Yay, great.
So thank you, Louise, for sharing that.
Great.
I think some of these people could teach a class too.
I think they could too.
Yeah. How about problems with squirrels getting into the garden? Any suggestion about that? I know we don't want to put any chemicals down because we're growing edible food.
Yeah. You have a dog that barks.
Those
are hard questions. It's hard to do that. I will tell you, there's a publication that we have in our Master Gardener offices, and it's also online. It's from Nebraska Extension, and it's called has something about controlling wildlife in the garden, and it has a lot of information in there about different techniques you might want to try. And that's from the Extension office in Nebraska University Extension.
Yeah. Kelly has a question. How many raspberry plants can you plant in a square foot box? You happen to be our raspberry specialist. Gonna throw that out.
In a how large of a box?
In a square foot box.
Okay, so one foot by 1 foot then. Start off with one, and you'll have more the next year and more the next year. Too many, and you'll have to cut a lot of them down because you'll end up with too many. So in 1 by 1, just start with one.
Aha, okay. Let's see. I think someone Holly, would you please type your question in again, because maybe it was for another topic, but I don't see it anymore. Kelly has a question. Kombucha SCOBY, is that a good fertilizer?
Say that again.
Kombucha is, a fermented
Oh,
a liquid, and there's this little or a mother, and can that be
Priscilla, it sounds to me like you know more about that than I do. I've never even heard of that fertilizer.
It's not a fertilizer, and we are going to have to do a little research on that for you, Kelly. You've stumped us. Don't know.
So she can call, she can check on the Metro Master Gardener website and ask her question to the Master Gardeners that are answering questions online. So if she goes to cmastergardeners.org, she will be able to get to that website also, and then she'll be able to ask those questions.
All right. And Karen Oakley from Massachusetts says, thanks so much. These are great gardening tips for the New England area.
Oh, good. Welcome.
Yeah. Here's an answer. Peggy says that SCOBY, I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right, is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. So I think I still need to do research on that.
Me too.
Okay. Can one use vermiculite to loosen up soil?
Normally, we don't use vermiculite in our garden areas. It's not an organic material. It's a mineral, correct? Am I right? It's found in potting soils and potting mixes, which is not what we normally add into our garden soils.
Yeah. So would that go along also with the not adding pumice either? If you need to loosen
there's
up
really no reason to. It's not going to add anything. It's not going to strengthen the soil like organic material would be. It's the organic material that we want to add to the soil.
All right. All right. Well, I think we are oh, no. Tony wants to know what type of manure would you say is safe to add to raised beds at this time of the year?
If it's aged, cow manure, chicken manure, if it's aged. I know there is a list of some of the manures that are not recommended for gardens. Do you remember that list, Priscilla? Do you happen to remember that list? I know llama is okay.
No, I don't know that off the top of my
head. Which ones are not. So I would definitely check the list. There's a list out there from Oregon State that talks about the types of manures to use. It needs to be aged if you're going to use it at this time of year. And
what about Jiffy pots? Do you recommend using Jiffy pots?
A lot of people use those to start their seeds. It's whatever you prefer.
And a follow-up to the asparagus question, if someone doesn't have space in a garden to plant asparagus, is asparagus going to work in pots?
Since you're going to be doing a talk, Priscilla, on
containers,
maybe you should answer this one. I think it will if the pot is large enough. Am I right?
Yeah. We just have to know that the pot has a limited amount of space, and as asparagus grows, it does like to spread out, and so that's going to be your limitation. You might need to dump that pot out every once in a while, separate it, and then repot it, because you will, if there's too much crowding, it's not going to do well either. So
that's good.
There we go. And someone said that horse poop is not friendly due to the contaminations.
Very true. That's true. That was one of them. I'd forgotten about that. And the weed seeds that are in horses, their stomachs don't digest all that. Yes.
Okay. And Zaid is joining us from Saudi Arabia and just loved your lecture and all the useful information. So Jane, that, it's really appreciated.
Oh, thank you.
And Christine, I think we answered your question that asparagus can be divided and replanted. So, oh boy, This is something that people ask every year for all sorts of gardening. Suggestions for keeping cats out of garden beds.
Unless you fence it, I don't know a way to keep a cat out. Yeah. There's a lot of information out there of things that they say might work, and most people say, it doesn't. I know,
Yeah.
it's not fun. Sorry, keep it inside.
Yeah, but
Neighbors.
neighbors. All right, sorry. Sometimes it helps to put nutshells in there because they don't like to walk on that. So you can try and deter them with something that is uncomfortable, and maybe they'll choose to go somewhere else.
I know one thing that people have used with deer that works for a short amount of time that might work with cats is the motion sensor sprinklers. And when it was low enough to where the cat was walk through, would activate the motion sensor, then the water would squirt on the cat and probably keep him away. So that might be something to try if you're really desperate.
All righty. What do you recommend for damping off seedlings?
Damping off is caused when the soil that you're growing your seeds in is too wet or there's too much humidity around them. So you need to be careful how you grow them. You need to make sure that, usually this only happens with seedlings when they start, when you're starting your seedlings. Make sure that the seedling starting mix has enough that it can drain well, that you're not going to have water sitting in that mix, and make sure that you have enough air circulation around those plants so that they doesn't cause the damping off.
Yep. And Leah also mentioned that those motion sensors can help keep the crows away as well.
So, good to know.
Good to know. Thank you, Leah. And Susan says, great presentation.
Thank you.
And do you use biodynamic gardening techniques or know anyone who does?
Here's a good answer. No, I don't.
Me neither.
But there's another one of those. I really love it. These people bring up these subjects and we don't know everything. It's nice to learn something new. So there's another one we're going to have to check on, Priscilla.
Uh-huh. All righty. All righty. Someone else says, to keep out cats, I used bird netting propped up against a few inches above the seed beds. It discouraged them long enough for the seeds to germinate and kept them away. So I like these suggestions because
we can always use them. That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah. Kelly has a question about tomatoes. Now that is not a cool crop, but obviously she must be somewhere warm because she said she accidentally shocked her tomato seedlings. And how can she bring them back?
I'm not sure exactly what she means by she shocked them. In other words, they got too much heat, too much sun, too much.
I think brought them out. It didn't harden them off. They didn't go through the hardening process.
Hardening process, yeah.
And once a plant has been kind of shocked, as you mentioned, they are going to be vulnerable to disease. And so I would start that hardening off process over again and see if they can come back.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So sorry about that.
Yeah.
Sorry about those poor seeds, those poor tomatoes.
Yeah. Like that. Ellen has a blueberry question. My blueberries were ice storm pruned and I've cut out all the dead pieces. What should I do with what's left on the plants? Should she prune it as usual? It's not super clear to me.
Yeah, that's what you
cut out the dead pieces.
Prune as
so
usual.
What else?
Yep, anything that's dead and broken, and then she just needs to go ahead and look at the blueberry presentation that we did. That is
Yes.
on seamastergardeners.org. It'll tell you exactly how to prune them.
Yeah. Well, we've had amazing questions. We've had some we've been stumped a few times, but just remember that the seamastergardeners.org is a wealth of information. So if we weren't able to come up with it on the spot, maybe it's you'll find it there. Jane, we really appreciate your preparation of this this wonderful talk, and I think we need to wrap things up now.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, everyone. I thank you for listening and enjoy your gardening. Thank you.
Indeed. Enjoy your gardening. Bye-bye.
Bye.